Bishop Joseph Strickland has been visited by two bishops from the Congregation for the Bishops. This happened last Saturday night, roughly 3 days ago. And I thought what I was going to do today was bring you an update. I have the reasonable means to believe that an update was possible, would be possible. It turns out, as just some commentator, I wind up with lots of the capacities of an actual journalist. And what I can say today is, while theoretically speaking, there are updates that are possible, not only plausible, it's a bad situation for Bishop Strickland, and I wanted to do a promise show reviewing the facts, impelling prayer on Bishop Strickland's behalf, and giving you, I think, the primary takeaway. And normally I come before you and offer what I think are the primary takeaways, but I think there's only one here, and it's a question not about Bishop Strickland, but about Pope Francis himself. It's a question about the nature of a pope who proves to be a tyrant. So that's what I promised today. We're going to review the facts. We're going to go over the grounds for that which would impel prayer on behalf of this goodly Bishop Bishop Strickland. And then we'll talk about, I think, the real reasons why Francis is a tyrant, and the one takeaway from this, the big question surrounding his pontificate. Everything points to it in this late hour in the Francis pontificate. Everything points at this question about what is the deal with Francis. And this episode with Bishop Strickland is just one more link in the chain. And it's a big one because little diocese, it's the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, in East Texas, a world away from this tyrant pontiff who was hell-bent and has been hell-bent on making a mess, as he promised the partisans who elected him. I will make a mess of the pontificate. That's what we should do. He's said that we're not allowed to convince others of our Christian faith. He said all manner of material heresy, and yet there's real reason to believe more than not that we ought to continue to call him pontiff. I think I have the fix, the big point in question on this Pope issue. So stay tuned. A few brief notes from Rules for Retrogrades. If you go to timothyjgordon.com, we now are offering an updated Catholicism versus Feminism, Just the Sources bibliography from Ask Your Husband and Case for Patriarchy. We made it available for free for at least a short while longer. We put out as much free stuff as we can, which is quite a bit. And this is no exception. For those who can't afford to buy Ask Your Husband or Case for Patriarchy, we've provided Just the Sources. Steph recently updated it because after reading through the entire Old Testament over Lent, she found 50, no less than 50 passages that are anti-feminist that come directly from the Old Testament. Some of them are scalding, more scalding than St. Paul, who writes some amazing stuff, pro-masculinist stuff in the New Testament. Go to www.timothyjgordon.com and get this today. This brings me to my next point. If you want to support the show, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you want to donate to me, I have a daughter who requires brain surgery on average from time to time, every few years. I think if we averaged it out, every 3 or 4 years. And we have very expensive health care for that daughter. So if you want to help me, the man, has nothing to do with the show, also go to timothyjgordon.com and go to donate. Further, if you want to support the channel, we've been kicked off of Patreon, and we are on Locals and Subscribestar. Please support the channel there for Patreon-like benefits. It really, really helps. Please do that today. Now, tomorrow, I'm prepared to bring you a show in concordance with the real mission of this channel over the last 2 years, which is helping married people. It's a show on the tangle of marital sexual ethics. On Catholic Twitter, which I really stay away from as much as I can these days, there are just a slew of confused points of view on what, in the course of the marital act, a husband and wife are allowed to do. And what I'm bringing you tomorrow is a show on Rules for Retrogrades live on what the manualist tradition says. Starting in the 16th and the 17th centuries, the manualist tradition, which is the closest thing we have to a magisterial teaching in the Roman Catholic Church, tells husbands and wives with some specificity, not over much, what they're allowed to do. And so tomorrow will be a show for adults only, but I think a helpful, necessary one. It's the marital act, the formal act of marriage, and people need help. People are really confused. Do you have to put a paper bag over the face of your wife because it's lusting over her to be too into her beautiful face while you're performing the marital act? A lot of trads out there say stuff like this. That's not true. Are you allowed to, I don't know, do whatever you want like the pagans within the confines of marriage? No, the answer is also no. This came up with Elliot Holz, who's a relatively recent revert, on one of our CMASC episodes. And together, myself and Will Noland will be going through what the manualist tradition teaches in tomorrow's show. As you know, this is what we do here on Rules for Retrogrades. It's help in a fatherless time, biologically, ecclesiologically. You can't go to your bishop. If they say something true, they're going to get visited by the Vatican and told either whatever Strickland was told. If you keep up with the loud truth saying. So it falls to lay people over whom there are no real tyrants who have such jurisdiction. And that's what we've been doing for you. Final point. It's the dead of summer. First day of summer was 5 or 6 days ago. Get out of your blue state, get to a red state today. Summer is the time to do a move like this. I know it's hot and sweaty moving your furniture out, but aside from that, it's the best season. Get out of your blue state, get to a red state today. Go to realestateforlife.org. I suggest the swath of blood red states from Texas to Florida. That's where I moved when I had to get out of my very blue California. Go to realestateforlife.org today. It's the best time to do it, aside from the sweaty moving conditions. How did this all begin with Bishop Joseph Strickland? Now, there are 4,653 other Catholic podcasts that are talking about Bishop Strickland yesterday or today. So originally I was going to bring on Jesse Romero. I thought I had some updates. It turns out we have to be a little more careful with the information in and out. It's not my favorite way, being tight-lipped. It's not my nature, but it's part of doing what we do here. We gotta be discreet to help protect the bishop. So he was visited 3 nights ago on Saturday night, following upon the protest that he helped to lead outside of his jurisdiction, outside of his diocese, in Los Angeles on June the 16th for a Dodger game. This led many to speculate that the punishment involved his behavior. It's not clear precisely what the visit from the Congregation of Bishops by 2 Francis appointees means, what it points to. Is it castigatory? Is it actually leveling a strict punishment? Is it a shot across the bow? It seems to be a little bit of both, but it's difficult to say what. The information in and out of Bishop Strickland's office is very tight at this point. I know a little more than I can say, but not much. And others have surmised that it involves a tweet that Bishop Strickland made, critical of Francis, about 3 weeks old from today's date, saying he was not on board Francis's program, which is an obvious enough point. Maybe, arguably, he should have done it more subtly. I don't like that. I like being direct. It's an obvious enough point. There is no one that can be down with Francis's program, and popes all have a program, right, a pontifical scheme, and be a faithful son of the Holy Catholic Church. There's no way to do it. Same as there's no way to be a good disciple of ordered liberty and love Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin. One cannot be a close disciple of Francis and a willing, enthusiastic participant in the Roman Catholic tradition. This should be clear enough to everyone. Okay, so was it the tweet? I would say probably. Was it his participation in the Dodgers? Now, he was outside of jurisdiction. I'm not sure he cleared his participation in the march on June 16th against PRID night with the bishops in LA who basically stood down. Could it have something to do with his activity there? Quite possibly. Could it have to, I mean, now some people online are blaming my friend Patrick Coffin because the tweet, aforesaid tweet by Bishop Strickland, was a kind of ideological rebound from his asking Coffin, Strickland's asking Coffin to pull his name off of the original Hope is Fuel meeting. I think this is quite far-fetched, right? This doesn't really work this way in terms of moral onus. It is not Patrick Coffin's fault that, and if Bishop Strickland said, hey, pull my name off Hope is Fuel, but I don't want to look like a lefty cancel culture guy, so I'm going to say, but I don't agree with Pope Francis, and therefore Patrick Coffin is remotely guilty for said chain of events. That's not how it works. Causation must be, as in the law, even not just criminal law, but even tort law, it must be proximate. There might be some real relation between these events, even a causal one in nature, but it's a remote causal nature. Bishop Strickland, if you don't know by now, I mean, the guy is his own man. He governs his diocese according to his own conscience and his apparently tremendous love for the Holy Family, Jesus Christ. He's a brave man. He allegedly, by all reports, sits alone at the bishops' conferences. He's not intimidated to march to the beat of a different drummer. And that's what you'd have to do if you were a faithful Roman Catholic bishop in 2023. The bishops are all either complicit or willfully blind with Francis's program. And, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Yes, people will talk about prudence. Prudence, by definition, can't be judged by another man. God alone is the judge of prudential decisions. So you might think that he deserved, you might say, I like Bishop Joseph Strickland, but he deserved that pontifical visit by the Congregation of the Bishops because, he should have voiced his concern with the Francis pontificate more prudently. Well, you're begging the question. Prudential judgments are not yours or mine to judge heads of households. I'm a father, you're a father, let's say that. I can say you seem imprudent to me, but only God's the judge. Same thing bishop to bishop. They're like the heads of households. The households are dioceses. So that's the way, the conditions by which the papal visit arose. Delegates on Pope Francis's behalf, of course, not Pope Francis himself. And there hasn't been a lot of information in or out. Now, speaking to Jesse Romero last night, I thought I had some info. It turns out whether or not it's real info, it's not actionable info. So I would say, look, wait and see. Wait and see what develops in poor Joseph Strickland's case. And pray for the man. Pray fervently for this man. I mean, I call the listeners, viewers of this show, parish orphans. Why? Because we live in the age of the crisis of fatherhood. As Pope Benedict XVI said himself, we live in the era of the crisis of fatherhood. And it's as applicable to the episcopus as to our own biological situation, right? Maybe more applicable. But it's an ugly, fatherless landscape that was dreamed up by the feminists inside and outside of the church in the middle of the 19th century, in the mid-1800s, that is. The first wave feminists said, we're going to get women into the churches, hopefully eventually as bishops, but get them into the parish life. We're going to make mothers really in charge of families by giving them a paycheck, getting them out of the home, creating an uprising in homes. And both of these statements, they're not direct quotes, are in the 1848 document called the Declaration of Grievances, a Declaration of Sentiments, written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton at the Seneca Falls Convention of Feminists in upstate New York in 1848. Now, I've made a lot out of this document and of the convention itself in 1848 because of a good reason. What's that reason? That for a man to be a good man, to try to be a good man, I'll say try, to try to be a good man and to lead his wife and kids is an act of rebellion in the eyes of the mob nowadays. For a bishop to try to lead as a good man his diocese directly in the tracks, the footprints of Jesus, is taken as an incendiary, subversive act in the feminist church of the 21st century. It's just that simple. Feminism, starting in at least 1848, it really got us, okay? And, you know, a lot of conservatives out there want to complain about, gender dysphoria or, marriage between a couple of Skittles. Yeah, these things are evil.
Taste the rainbow.
Yeah, taste the rainbow. But these are not what drove our church and our families, right? The secular the lay patriarchs and the episcopal patriarchs underground. What drove them underground is feminism. And it was by design, and it both halves of this, to attack the clerical patriarchy and the lay patriarchy, and they're all in that 1848 document. Again, go see our Catholicism versus Feminism PDF for free for a little while longer. We're not going to keep it free forever. It's too much work updating this thing. It was 28 pages, now it's like 35. We might print it, bind it, and sell it. And again, this is all a way of trying to keep it cheap for people that, can't buy a trade paperback book or a cheap hardcover book. So that's what we're trying to do. So once again, everything boils back down to feminism in the church. Francis's pontificate is the feminist pontificate writ large. I mean, in some sense, John Paul II was the first real feminist in the whole, the See of Peter. But Francis's pontificate is absolutely marked by his strong connections to the global elite, which is to say the feminist global elite, which are pushing things other than outright feminism now, like I said, G and B and L and T, but really the feminism is the thing. All this means that Bishop Strickland needs our prayers. Please pray nightly for this man with your families. Please pray on the daily for this man. He needs it. That I can tell you. He needs your prayers. Now, the most interesting implication of this whole thing, unless you're Bishop Strickland or you're in the diocese itself, I'm a well-wisher. I consider him like a father, someone like most of you who don't really have an Episcopal father in my own diocese. It's bad news. Most of our allegiance to our bishop is de minimis. But the most important implication is always back to the See of Rome. What does this mean about Francis? That he would pay Bishop Strickland a visit for just being a faithful son of the church? Well, it means that this is, and we've said it a million times before, this is either the worst pontificate in the history of the world or not. But the not option is not that he really is Pope and he's doing a good job. That ship has sailed. That ship sailed 10 years ago. I mean, it's not an option. There is no doubt there. Benefit of the doubt requires doubt. Francis does not have any doubt. Just either an evil pontiff, which is what I'm presuming at this point, the most evil, or maybe with retroactivity, it turns out that he was not pontiff at all. I still think this is the minority option if we were to have odds makers in Vegas run all of the facts and do their odds making magic today. So it's still more likely, I guess, that he's just Pope. So I call him Pope Francis every show. I've never faltered. I call him Pope Francis. But we really don't know for certain. Now, I'm responding and have interacted just before I rolled the camera here to a tweet by Edward Fazer, I think greatest living English language philosopher writ large, and one of the ablest Catholic thinkers out there, probably the greatest Catholic out there, certainly under 60 years old. And I've known Ed for a long, long time, and I've respected him for as long as I've known him. But here's what he wrote about 2 hours ago. He said, "The premise is assumed by those arguing that Francis isn't Pope, not me. This doesn't apply to me. Namely, that his election was invalid, that he lost his office due to heresy, or that he didn't validly resign, are false. But even if they were true, it's not your call to make. The church as an institution settles such things." Now, I responded with the following. There are two claims here, right? That the premises about Francis not being a pope are certainly false. And this is Ed Fazer saying this is a layman. And that it's not your call to make. The church alone settles such things. They could be, I don't think this is how Ed intended them, but this is the central question of the Francis pontificate. Is there a distinction that needs to be made between a layman, like let's say Tim Gordon, being barred juridically from announcing that Francis isn't Pope? Of course, this is the case. But should a distinction be made from a layman, Tim Gordon, being barred from epistemically recognizing that he'll probably later be declared an anti-pope? Is this a distinction without a difference, or is it a reasonable distinction? You see? I said, for the record, I agree 100% that the church alone has the de jure power to pronounce anti-popes. Juridically, the church has the sole discretionary authority to declare anti-popes. No question. But, this is the second part of my tweet, if the claim is not restricted, I'm talking about Dr. Fazer's claim, if the claim is not restricted to strictly jurisdictional limitations, then your epistemic claim, Ed, might be taken to contradict your ecclesiastical claim. In other words, if a layman is not in the position to make the call whether a pope is pope, then he can neither independently affirm nor deny it. Just, dependently, he just says so because the church tells him so. Right? And that I don't think this is how Ed meant the tweet. But if he's saying he's certain as a layman, independent of what the church is saying, that Francis is Pope, then that would be a yes vote on laymen are capable at times of rendering epistemically the call. This guy's definitely a pope, but this guy definitely isn't. If the claim is not restricted to strictly jurisdictional limitations, your epistemic claim might be taken to contradict your ecclesiastical claim. Namely, if his claim goes like this: a layman, qua a layman, can't correctly recognize, not just rule on, but recognize an anti-pope, then there's actual contradiction between those two parts of his tweet. The part that the church as an institution alone can discern such things, if he means the church alone settles such things, contradicts the idea that, hey, I, Ed Fazer, am certain that Pope Francis is the Pope, because he's just a layman just like me. That's necessarily incorrect if he intended the tweet that way. If this were true, then he couldn't independently, definitively affirm a pope any more than he could independently, definitively disaffirm a pope as a true pope. On the other hand, it is quite conceivable, but not necessarily true. I'm not my friend Pat Coffin over here. That a layman may correctly spot an anti-pope ex ante, that means from before the announcement of such, but cannot compel weak or blind prelates to declare it. I'll repeat that. It is quite conceivable, this is according to me, but not necessarily true, that a layman may correctly spot an anti-pope ex ante, but cannot compel weak or blind prelates to declare it. And I think that's our situation. Maybe not more than 50-50, but I think that could be our situation. If you told me 30%, in 10 years, Pope Francis will have died, and immediately after his death, there was some sort of imperfect conclave, or whatever you call it, of cardinals and prelates who get together and say, okay, this was not a valid pontificate. For all of these reasons. Well, we'll talk about them in a second. And it turns out that there either hasn't been a pope since 2013 or since Benedict died in late 2022, depending on whether or not the reason for the invalidation was Benedict's resignation papers. There are lots of theories that are plausible. Then I would say that wouldn't shock me if I wouldn't be scandalized by someone saying, look, I'm 30% confident. 70% confident the other way, but 30% confident that if you sealed me in like a cryogenic slumber, a la Dr. Evil, and woke me up in 10 or 15 years, I will wake up to learn that there's with 30% certitude, that the Francis pontificate was never valid. I'd say it doesn't sound wrong. 30% doesn't sound way off. Some days I feel like it's only a 20%. Some days I feel like it's a 40%. That could be the case. Here's how I closed my tweet to Ed Fazer. And then I'll make the connection to the Bishop Strickland affair here. I said, on the other hand, it is quite conceivable that a layman may correctly spot an anti-pope ex ante, but cannot compel weak or blind prelates to declare it. So there's a difference between the juridical power of a layman and the epistemic power of a layman. What can he know? You can see quite a lot. Given the testimony of bad guys like Cardinal Daniels, who said they had a mafia club, later known as the St. Gallen Mafia, that canvassed for Francis, Austin Ivory, the Pope's own biographer in English language, the first edition of his biography called The Great Reformer, by the way, said that Francis gave assent to such canvassing, or something like giving assent. Eugenio Scalfari, who conducted 11 or 12 interviews with he's an old atheist communist, with his dear friend, Pope Francis. And in at least one of those, Scalfari claimed that Francis told him he did not believe Jesus was God while he was man. So, in other words, he told him he's not a Christian. You can't be a Christian and believe Jesus wasn't God while he's man. Can we have a non-Christian pope? right? So those three bad guys alone, Cardinal Daniels, I say Austin Ivory is a bad guy. I guess you could debate it, but, and Eugenio Scalfari, on their evidence alone, this is what we call in law an admission by a party opponent, a friend of Francis. On that basis alone, you could say there's at least a 30% chance of this. Now, juridically, it's going to take some brave or unblind cardinals to make the church recognize it, speak it into ontological reality. That's the weird situation about being a Roman Catholic, folks. Our ecclesiology is in ontology and potency. And this is what I tried to explain to my friend Pat Coffin. Look, man, we got a lot of limp-wristed bishops and cardinals. A lot. If their chance to be honest about what we think might have happened with Bergoglio, if that slips by and they never speak it into existence by saying, guess what? We, the cardinals, say Francis was never Pope, then he was Pope. So while our ecclesiology is supposed to be reflective of ontology, which is to say reality, if they never, as a matter of fact, because we already know they're kind of limp-wristed and weak, if they never get together and make that definitive act, then a Pope he was. So that's what's weird about being a Roman Catholic. That's the central fact. And by the way, even a good guy like Cardinal Walter Brandmuller gives evidence that there is such a thing as a Sankt Gallen mafia agenda. He said the order with which this stuff would happen, he said it would be communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, then very pro-body, and then women deacons, and then intercommunion with Lutherans. All these are in the works, even at this very synod on synodality. By the way, I didn't do a show on it, but the relatio, or the working document that was published last week, thanks to Diane Montagna, justifies the existence, the belief in the existence of this agenda because it talks about women deacons and very pro-body. So you can't rule this out in our situation in 2023. And people will say to me, I have the Beneplanist folks, Ann Barnhart, not Pat or Ed Mazza, but we have some in their ranks say, hey, pick a side. I'm like, I will not on this. I have never been on matters that are cognizable immediately. I have never been loath to pick a side. I have been the most willing of all of the folks you watch on YouTube to pick a side on cognizable matters. Hence, what we've done with feminism. We've pushed the right side of the Overton window. We've stretched it back by like half a foot. And it's only a 3-foot window, folks. So we're not hesitant here at Rules for Retrogrades to take a position, but we simply can't take a position beyond what I already said. Beyond saying, look, juridically, there's nothing I can do. Epistemically, I've told you. Average day, I'm 30%. Right? Maybe I've never actually quantified. Average day, I'm 30%. This may, in the future, be invalidated. And I'll even go further. I'll do you one better. That's not on the average bad day. That jumps to 40% for me. But, on a skeptical of skepticism day, it shrinks to 20%. I'll do you one better, though. It's only 30%, not because I don't think they have the evidence. It's only a mere 30%, in my mind, because I know who the bishops are. Personnel is policy. If we had the bishops and the cardinals of the year 1800, I'm not even going to tell you what I would say the percentage is. In other words, it's not the objective component of the evidentiary process for finding an anti-pope that I think is holding things up. That makes me think 70% Francis will be forevermore called Pope Francis. It's the subjective component of the process, which is who are the people that get to make the call. They're all Francis partisans, or Francis terrified partisans. It's a lot higher than 30% if I'm judging the objective component, the evidence against Francis. So it's a composite, a subjective, objective mix. That's what a composite is. When we move to describe the evidentiary process by which a pope is rendered an anti-pope, it's only the churches. The objective stuff is stuff we can all see, and I think there's plenty of evidence. If you had a willing cardinalate get together the day after Francis died and say, look, all we're judging Francis's the validity of the ontological existence of Francis's pontificate on the basis of is what's been floated out there to the American Catholic public, I would say that's enough evidence to convict, right? So I don't know what that tells you about where I'm coming from. I'm saying there's only a 30% chance, maybe less. Some days I said it shrinks to 20, that the cardinals will do that. And they do have the power of binding and loosing, which means they have the retroactive powers to either say, under this exact pattern of facts, Francis is Pope, or say under this exact same pattern of facts that he has not been Pope all this while. Welcome to Catholicism. It's similar but not identical analysis to what I said about the Novus Ordo, Traditionis Custodes, the TLM, bi-ritualism, as Francis is called, the Roman Rite, which has the only one with a high and a low, ordinary and extraordinary. I said, yeah, it's an evil act if Francis, Tyrant Francis, who I fully expect it from, says, no more TLM. I'm making it go bye-bye forever. It would be evil. But it's not an evil act beyond his powers. This just blew everyone's minds when I debated Tim Flanders on the Mass of the Ages documentary channel. And guess what? I'm glad I had that view. That's the right view. I've reviewed it since then. Francis could do it or not do it. Would it be prudentially evil? Yeah, I'm 99.9% sure it would be if he did it. That doesn't mean he doesn't have that power. Similarly, I'm not 99% sure on anything regarding the validity of the Francis pontificate, but I'm confident that with the amount of evidence that I even have in my head on the Francis pontificate, including some of the things he's done as Pope, like the Scalfari interviews, that weighs against objectively believing or not believing he's a Pope. And the cardinals can either find it or not find it without any variation. It's not like, well, if they find a little more evidence, they'll find it he's anti-Pope or Pope. If they find a little less, they'll find he's Pope or anti-Pope. It doesn't work like that. Binding and loosing is a huge thing, people. And there's no other channels out there telling you how huge a power the episcopal power of binding and loosing is. These guys can do or not do, act or not act, decide or not decide with truth. And we're sort of bound to it. No. And the ways in which we're bound to false findings by a bunch of bishops are complex, and you have to do whole shows on them. Whether we're talking liturgy, we're talking a given pontificate, a doctrine that's nigh irreformable, like the death penalty, which Francis, together with John Paul II, have really reversed. Whether we're talking about something that's irreformable, that Francis has reversed, even though it's irreformable, like unrepentant adulterers cannot receive the Eucharist without incurring additional sin, without blaspheming the Eucharist. Well, Francis reversed that. That's not nearly irreformable. That's an irreformable teaching of the church, direct from the Bible. And he reversed that. So, I mean, there's so many instances. I've done shows on this called like the 101 Outrages of Francis. I've been very one-voiced. I've spoken with a single mind on Francis. There's nothing to contradict any of this. And the Bishop Strickland debacle is just one more link in the chain. Now, it shows one thing that we didn't necessarily know before. Suspected it, didn't know it. They are watching. America, sorry, America haters. America's still the leader of the world. American Catholics, I'm judging the laity now, are the leader of the Catholic lay world. And Rome is watching. Rome is watching certain of our Twitter accounts, certain of the bishops, like this small diocese's patriarch, Joseph Strickland, to keep an eye on it. Now, it might not have been Francis himself that saw that tweet that Strickland did 2 to 3 weeks ago, but he's got someone with eyes on it, and they hopped a plane within 3 weeks. Okay, so that's the takeaway. Bishop Strickland needs our prayers. Francis is a tyrant at best, right? Rather than a pretender, was the other option. But he's a tyrant, a legitimate pope turned tyrant, who is watching jealously the faithful Catholics, particularly in the episcopate, who stick to their Catholicism rather than follow Francis to this heinous one world masonry fraternity religion thing that he's cooking up. Once again, I said it before, I'm not saying anything new at this point. I don't know why people wouldn't be taking a wait and see approach like I am, but with the hopes that he is an anti-pope somehow. Why not take a wait and see? I'll call him pope, but man, things are way cleaner if he's not. And I'm saying, I think 70%, I don't think cardinals are ever going to invalidate this pontificate. I don't. They'd have to do it.
It would take.
What?
And that's what it would take.
That's what it would take. De jure. I don't think epistemically, I'm like barred from, oh, look, I read Julian Maloney's book. I forwarded the book. I read Cardinal Daniel's interview where he said we canvassed for him. I have heard and had some friends who have the first edition of Austin Ivory's first edition of The Great Reformer, where he admitted that Francis himself gave a little indication that he would assent to such canvassing, which is supposed to invalidate the pontificate, I think. Right? All this stuff I can see as a layman. I remember reading the better part of most of those Scalfari Francis interviews, and I remember a couple of them being not just heretical materially, but would place any speaker outside the comfy bounds of Christianity. You can't believe, as any kind of Christian, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, doesn't matter whether you're a prelate or a layman, you can't believe that Jesus was fully human while he was alive. That means you're not a Christian. He allegedly said this to Scalfari, and the Vatican never specifically denied the claim. After that interview, they said, hey, he got some stuff wrong, but they never denied that one. Scalfari, I know, takes interviews in the old European style. It's considered an old but a valid style of journalism. By that I mean he does it all by memory and he reconstructs what he thought he heard. It's a horrible way to go about journalism.
It's terrible.
But it's what they used to do. It's what they did for hundreds of years. The guy was like 97 when he died. He was doing journalism until he died. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can't teach these old guys how to use Google. They're trying to, Google you on there. Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm trying. This is a hairbrush, dude. That's not an iPhone. You can't teach them. They think this is the hairbrush and this is the iPhone. It's like an old Michael Scott gag. So that is a valid style of journalism that Scalfari used. It's old, but valid. Like Francis probably is. Old, evil, probably valid as a pope. But if that's the case, what I'm assuming 70% or better, that he's an old, evil, valid pontiff, then we are left with a big, sticky mess. A much bigger, stickier mess than if he is an anti-pope. So I don't get the spirit of tweets or comments like Dr. Fazer's. I don't get them. Why would anyone want Francis, with all the hell he's brought, with all the Cain he's raised, to be a valid pontiff? We've had 30 anti-popes. It's like 1.5 per century if you average it out. It's totally plausible. Even if it's not the case with Francis, why not say, shucks, that was an easy solve. That was an easy workaround, as we called it in the oil and gas industry. Do you have any easy workarounds, or do we have to do this the hard way? The easy workaround is Francis wasn't a pope at all. We don't have to deal with all these material heresies he christened. We don't have to abide all these material heretics that he incarnated as bishops. We don't have to accept all these good guys that he harassed, like Bishop Strickland. I can't remember, did Bishop Strickland get made? He's been made a bishop for right around the same amount of time that Francis has been pope. I can't remember if he was just before or just after incarnated as bishop. You get the point, though. This is a unique approach here on Rules for Retrogrades. This whole Rules for Retrogrades, always distinguish, but say what's certain, say what's up in the air kind of approach. I don't know why it's so unique. This should be the approach that everybody has, and you guys listening know it. That's why you listen to this channel. That's why you watch this channel. That's why you read the books. I'll always tell you what I do know and what I don't know. As long as I have that Socratic irony in a situation. Every once in a while, you think you knew, and you didn't know.
November 28th, 2012. Strickland.
Okay, so see, I was right that he was right around the beginning of the Francis pontificate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, boy, he was made bishop 4 months before Francis became pope. So I remembered that. I knew their tenures were very, very similar, but I couldn't remember if he was. Yeah, so he's a Benedict bishop. Very hot today. Here in the south, with humidity, we have something called a heat index. We didn't really know what this was in dry deserts of California. Desert California. You don't know what a heat index is. It's the heat plus the humidity, what it feels like to the skin. And it's dangerous to walk outside to your mailbox day to day. So I'm literally hot up here, even with the air conditioning on. God bless you all. I hope this has been helpful. Tomorrow's show should also be helpful. No one freak out. Don't listen with your kids tomorrow. It's going to be a helpful show for you. We're going to go through the manualist tradition as to what you're allowed to do in the sack with the spouse. And this isn't really the call sign of this channel. I kind of tend to stay away from the grody stuff, but this is helpful, and we get a lot of questions about it. We got a lot of questions a couple CMASCs ago after Elliot Holst, one of the hosts of CMASC, was asking me and Will, well, what does the church say about this, and this, X, Y, Z? Are husbands and wives allowed to do this? We said, let's just do a show on it. God bless you all, parish orphans and retrogrades. Hopefully we see a brighter sun and a better day sometime soon. Deus Volt. God bless you.